Thank you, and turn it over to you.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. My name is Cynthia Walker. I'm the director at the Brickstar Museum here in Kennebunk, Maine. I want to thank everybody for coming to this session. Hopefully it's helpful to you. And I just wanted to give a second thanks to Crystallization Systems, who you just saw that video from, for the support of the NEMA conference this year, and of course support for museum professionals in our region. I don't know if anyone's checked out their exhibitor page yet, but when I saw the words, it can be put together by two people, as well as the fact that it's affordable is always attractive to those of us in small museums. So let me start off by saying this session is going to be most helpful to those who do not have facilities professionals on your staff. Just think of this as facilities 101, like the real basics you need to get yourself underway. And you're welcome to say, obviously, even if you have those professionals on your staff, but you might know some of this information already. Did I ever think that I'd be hosting a facilities session at NEMA? No, I did not. But honestly, facilities management is one of the largest time and money sucks, to be frank, especially if you have little experience with that. And in a small museum, when you wear every hat that there is, cutting down on both time and money is crucial to moving your museum forward, especially when you want to do all the ideas that you're going to be hearing about at the conference today. So I'll tell you a short story. I'm just going to share my screen to get that ready to go, actually. Forgot to do that. Make sure that that's happening. Okay. So I'll tell you a short story of why I ended up proposing this session for NEMA. As I said at the beginning, I'm the director of a small museum here in southern Maine. There are 4 of us on staff here. None of us are facilities professionals. I like to think that we're all fairly capable of doing our jobs, and we've all had the museum grad school training. But never once did we learn to use a screw gun or build a wall, or simple electricity, for that matter, would be wonderful to know about. So if you work at a small museum, facilities issues can quickly overtake pretty much anything else you want to do. That costs money, costs time, and it costs you a lot of stress. So really quickly, the day before I submitted this session to NEMA, I was sitting with a donor in our archives here at the museum, talking to them about types of programs that they wanted to support this year. And I saw a volunteer standing in the doorway with this kind of stone-faced look on her face. And she did, the come over signal, and I tried to, shoo her away for another time, but she kept standing there. So of course I excused myself from the donor meeting, and I went to ask her what was wrong, and she said there's something happening in the basement. Now the museum has 5 historic buildings, so I said, I'll get to it afterward. I'll go look in the basement after. And she said, I think you should go look now, which is always a horrible foreboding. It turned out that we had a raw sewage backup in our basement of our first building. Which, if any of you have had that experience, I'm both sorry for you, and you're in good company, hopefully. So the day after that, I decided to press send on the this session for NEMA, because I think we could all use help just in general facilities maintenance. We also don't have the funds, to be honest, to pay for a facilities person. So we need to be able to make some of these decisions by ourselves. And by ourselves, I mean museum professionals in different areas of work. So to move from the personal suffering portion of facilities management to a larger outlook, there is a straight line between more efficient systems for you, lowering facilities costs to then reinvest in the public portions of your museum, so exhibits, programs, collections, and then going green to improve the world that we all share. And if there was ever a quintessential museum thing to do, of course, it's to manage your work to then lead change for the rest of the community. So museums should be on the forefront of that sustainability, because we do every other kind of sustainability pretty well. Look around and you see so many institutions and their artifacts have been here for longer than most businesses have. So we're pretty good at that. We just have to get a little bit better at environmental sustainability. And the way we take the lead is through greening our own institutions. We're huge consumers of many energies and resources, and we'll be touching on some of these today, intermixed with some of those general building issues you might be running into. And since we only have an hour, and at this point a little less since I've been talking, and there's, I can't see how many people are on here, but I know that for every person on here, there's going to be a different facilities question because we all have different buildings that we're caring for. So I just want to note that we did not create a handout for this session, and that's because facilities issues are never stagnant and they're always going to be changing. And that's why on your screen right now, you can see something called the Small Museum Toolbox. And that's a website that I've created over the past week, to be honest, to collect answers, questions, how-tos, planning, and things, everything else in between, including some funding ideas to get these things done. And then as we go forward, hopefully this will be a kind of an aggregator of different ideas and different solutions for you, so you don't have to be Googling and calling people all the time. In a moment, I'm going to hand this over to Daryl Cooper, who is much more the expert on all of these things than I am. We've left plenty of time at the end for questions, since, as I said, there's going to be many different questions from different folks. I'll just say a couple of notes before I hand that over to Daryl. If you haven't done so, think about creating a cyclical maintenance plan. Literally do a walk around of your entire building or buildings every year. The first year you do that, the list of fix-its are going to be incredibly long, but at least you have a baseline to then track from there. And I'll see if I can scroll down on here. What I've done is created if you click on create a facilities maintenance plan, there's a whole step-by-step process of how to do that. And then actually I'll click on here because that'll give us the notes about what we're going to be talking about. I wanted to mention an initiative, if you haven't heard of it, called We Are Still In, which is many different sectors have signed on to this. It's relating to the Paris Climate Agreement. And museums can sign on to that too. And often my question has been, how can small museums, when you can't even get a handle on how much paper you use, how can small museums contribute to this initiative? And the first two things that I'll say, Sarah Sutton, who's going to be a speaker, keynote speaker on Wednesday's sessions, she has written several books for museums to get started on your own green journey. And literally one is called The Green Nonprofit, the first 52 weeks of your green journey. And I'd suggest starting there because they're just very simple, simple things to get done that you can do by yourself. We'll also on the website be talking about different facilities grants and funding, because that's often the problem that we all run into, that, you know, we'd love to change all the LED bulbs over, but we don't have a lot of money to do that, and donors don't seem to want to pay for it. And then kind of reimagining, just consider reimagining your small museum facilities plan as part of your entire mission. So don't think of it as like, oh, the problem that I have to deal with, but think about fixing what's wrong, preserving the structure, obviously, and then think about what the goals of your building are. So speak to your museum's mission through that facilities maintenance, and at least it won't feel like facilities maintenance is kind of that hanger-on that's always dragging you down. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Daryl Cooper, who has 35 years of experience in property management. And now he's the founding partner of Energy Audits Limited out of Portland.
Thank you, Cynthia. It's a pleasure to be here. Certainly am honored by the number of attendees for this session. And if you would be kind enough just to hold your questions until the end, that would be helpful. I bring to the table a variety of experiences. I worked on Wall Street, and then I decided I wanted to come back to my hometown in Maine, and went into real estate development. And when my first project was done, I couldn't find anybody to manage it. So that got me into property management. And then in 2009 or 2010, a quasi-government agency by the name of Efficiency Maine was founded. supported by monies from tax credits of New England, I think it's called green gases. In any event, the source of funding is from tax credits that corporations pay in order to compensate for carbon emissions. In addition, the agency also gets grants from the federal government. So kind of combining my financial background along with my property management background, I thought this was going to be a perfect combination. And it has worked out very, very well, because we have generated, I'm proud to say, we have generated well over $2 million in incentives for our clients. And the other task that we're taking on right now is we are an active supporter of our Governor Janet Mills, who enacted legislation last year to reduce carbon emissions by 40% by 2030. So what I'd like to share with you is certainly not only property management basics. I'd like to share with you the opportunity of creative financing in order to make improvements when you don't have money. I am going to touch on a very sophisticated tax strategy that may certainly be foreign to you. So I do want to invite all of you to call me at any time if there's something that you don't understand. My phone number is 207-632-8112. I would be happy to assist you if I can. So let's start out. Cynthia is a great segue in getting into facilities management. I had the opportunity, Cynthia called me a couple of years ago, and through a grant that she received, we had the opportunity to do an energy audit for Cynthia. It certainly was an eye-opener. We have had experience in doing historic buildings or older buildings, and there are always challenges, particularly if you're in a historic zone. So you do your walk around and you hope that you can see what to anticipate from wear and tear. A building's no different than a human being. Over time, it's going to wear out, and you've got to prepare for that. So I'd like to just share with you a few things that I think are kind of common in all buildings. By the way, the cost of energy is the second most expensive line item in a museum's budget after wages. So I think you have to give serious consideration as to how you can control those expenses. And even more important is how can you reduce them for a minimum amount of money. So I want to share some of these tips and tricks with you today. So let's talk about windows. How many of you have windows that when you sneeze, they rattle? So in historic districts, I'm sure you're all challenged with what do we do with windows? Windows are a hole in the wall. There's no question about it in old buildings. So we have started recommending what are called window inserts. And this is just taking some strapping, wrapping some poly around it, and fit it into your window on the inside. Very, very, very efficient and very cheap. We got into this idea through an organization here in Maine called Window Dressers. Wonderful organization. I personally volunteer to help them make these window inserts for low-income people. It's something that you really should think about because I'm sure you all experience, particularly in the winter, it's going to be cold if your windows aren't tight. And so one of the other things you really need to think about is when winter comes and you've got unheated areas in your building, if you've got water lines. One or two things. If you can drain the water, do it. If not, you should keep a little drip going so that the water doesn't freeze. Freeze ups are horrific, particularly in a museum where you're trying to certainly protect your collection. So we also need to think about safety. Obviously, you should all have hardwired smoke detectors. You should basically, traditionally, it's always been said that every time changes from Eastern Standard to daylight and daylight to Eastern Standard, you should change your batteries. My recommendation to you is to get what is known as a lithium battery smoke detector carbon monoxide combination. They're about $50. These are guaranteed for 10 years, and you've got double protection. And so what you're talking about basically is $5 a year for a smoke detector. Cheap, cheap, cheap. And the main thing is, hopefully you'll never have it, but if there's an issue, they're certainly going to go off. So think about that. If you experience ice dams, and a lot of these old buildings, there are ice dams, these certainly structurally very, very seriously. And from the same point of view, I hate to have some icicle fall on one of your donors as they're going into your building. So you can create, basically you might need to increase the ventilation in your attic so that what you need to do, the basic reason for ice dams is that the roof, the underside of the roof is warm from the heat escaping up into the attic, and that's going to create water on your roof, and then at night it freezes. So what you really need to do is increase the ventilation and equalize the outside temperature with the inside temperature. And so you ask, how do we do that? Well, the first question becomes, how is that heat getting into the attic? Well, most of you, I have no idea if you have hatches in your attic, but if you do, that is certainly the most common access to the attic. So very cheap fix. I'm telling you, I'm cheap. So, and I want to pass this on to you. So what you basically do is you take your hatch and you put 2 layers of styrofoam on top, nail it or glue it on top of the hatch. You then get some rubber and you establish a rubber gasket around the lid on which the hatch door rests. And then you get some hook and eyes and you basically install these hook and eyes so that when you pull down the door, it's going to compress against the rubber gasket and it's going to be tight. And this will help you tremendously in reducing the heat rising up into your attic. The other thing is, I'm hoping you all do, is please make sure you have automatic oil delivery. I know your budgets are tight, but you never want to take the chance that you're going to have no oil in the middle of the winter. Winters are very challenging for all of us in New England. So we need to be prepared and we need to be responsible for the integrity of our buildings. With great relief, spring comes. And at that point, we need to kind of take a look and see what needs to be done. Obviously, cleaning the filters of air conditioners and humidifier systems are important. Check to see if you have any ice damage in the attic or roof. See if you have any unwanted tenants in your building. About 2 years ago, I was asked to inspect a church which is being used by a historical society. And so I said, well, I need to get up into the attic. Oh, we haven't been up in the attic in 20 years. I said, well, I got to go up. So I got up there and lots of droppings from critters lots of critters scurrying around. So you need to make sure from a health point of view that you don't have any unwanted guests that may have taken residency during the cold weather. I'm sure a lot of you must have rock foundations and dirt floors. Dirt floors, cold dirt floors in the summer that are hit by humidity, it's going to create moisture in your building and your structure as well. Too much moisture can create rot, and also it can create some health hazards with mold. So what you should really do is you put poly, you cover the dirt floor with poly, and around the perimeter, you put stones to keep it down. And I know some of you have crawl spaces rather than full basements. My sympathy to you. But see if you can get some little guy to come in and lay that poly for you. So, you know, accept the fact your building, it is what it is. Besides, you know, stone foundations, you can have what is called balloon construction. Maybe you have that. It's kind of a double wall construction, which really makes it impossible if you want to do any insulation, because you're going to have to fill the cavity from the basement up to the ceiling. Definitely, financially, it really doesn't make any sense. So, you know, let's talk about some of the easy things that we can do. LED lights, that's a no-brainer. You can pick them up at Home Depot for $1. It depends really what kind of lights you have. But think about LED lights. They're not only the more energy efficient, but some of them are guaranteed to last for 50,000 hours. Less maintenance on your part. Now, and I'll get into this a little later of how do we upgrade with as little money as possible. But at the moment, these are things that you can do within your budget. You know, spray foam any pipe penetrations in the basement. You will be astounded at the gaps between the pipes and the penetration to the outdoors. Very simple, the can of spray foam. This will help eliminate any penetration by cold weather during the winter. If you have steam radiators, you're going to see pipes coming up from the basement, and typically there's a big space between the pipes and the hole in which it penetrates the floor. So think of covering that up as well. Cheap stuff to do, and it will reduce and improve the comfort during the winter. The other thing to look at, which is relatively inexpensive, are door sweeps. Door sweeps, again, you're in old buildings, they've settled. Certainly the doors aren't any more square than the windows are. But put in some door sweeps, and this again will help you reduce any cold air penetration. So let's talk. Now I'm putting on my my Wall Street hat, and I'd like to share with you some opportunities of how you can get funding to help in any improvements. There's a website called desireusa.org. I recommend that, going on there. It has a list of every state and what incentives are available to you. Public utilities, some of them offer free energy audits, some of them offer free light bulbs. Call them, find out. I can only relate right now to the state of Maine, and Efficiency Maine has been a tremendous resource for incentives. And they have incentives for lights, for boilers, for heat pumps. So I would suggest the other New England states certainly have agencies that are similar to Efficiency Maine. You know, incentives are free money. And so what you really need to take a look at is that's a step. And I can certainly relate to the fact that you all live on very, very tight budgets, and you don't have the luxury of being able to dole out money whenever you would like to. So we'll talk a little bit more as we go on. I'd like to talk a little bit about what I refer to as creative financing for you. So I would like to talk to you a little bit, and I think I'm going to relate strictly to Maine. But as I said, one of our missions has been to help our governor reduce carbon emissions by 40% by 2030. And that's with a program called Net Energy Billing. And basically what net energy billing is this gives you the choice of where you want your source of electricity to come from. Do you want it to come from fossil fuels, or would you like it to come from renewable energy such as solar? So under the recent legislation enacted here in the state of Maine, we now are having community solar farms being developed. And what this means is that you can subscribe to a portion of the output of a community solar farm, and your consumption for that will come from solar sources. And without getting into any great detail, but your consumption will be credited to your account through the interaction between the community solar farm and the existing utility from which you get your electricity. And at the end of the day, you will see on your existing utility bill a 15% discount. So this is an opportunity, which I love. You don't have to come up with any money, and you can reduce your electricity bill by 15%, and at the same time being a responsible citizen in helping to enhance the environment in which we live. It's a win-win. And so I would certainly seek that out in whatever state in which you reside. And we're doing a bang-up job with our clients doing that. It's just a no-brainer, and I can't emphasize it enough. So let's talk a little bit about your hot water costs. And what you don't particularly realize is that if your hot water is coming off your boiler is going all the time to maintain a certain hot water temperature, whether you need the boiler to work or not. You need it to work to keep the hot water, but you don't need it for heat in the middle of the summer. So you might consider another option. And the other thing that I wanted to discuss with you is what's known, which is basically having a separate electric hot water heater. Again, obviously that means you can shut the boiler down in the spring, but at the same time, an electric hot water heater is continually generating electricity to maintain the hot water temperature, whether you need it or you don't. So let me share with you, which is a great opportunity, and that's called a heat pump hot water heater. And maybe some of you are familiar with heat pumps, the kind that you install on your wall that provides you with both heat and air conditioning. They're extremely efficient. Without going into a great deal of detail, they use very little power to generate either heat or air conditioning. Simply the way it works is it extracts air that runs over a coil. And the coil is either in the winter, it's heated, in the summer, it's refrigerated. And this is how you generate either heat or air conditioning when you want it. So the same theory is being used in what's known as a heat pump hot water heater. And what the heat pump hot water heater does, which is not only going to save you a lot of money, but what's important is if your basements are wet or damp, the heat pump hot water heater, by its own nature of operation, is going to extract air from your basement. So basically what it's going to do is help you control any moisture problems you have in your basement. That's the good news. The bad news is this: since it extracts air, particularly in the winter, it's going to drop the temperature in your basement and you could have freeze-ups. So if you are considering a heat pump hot water heater, what you want is what is known as a hybrid heat pump hot water heater. And what is a hybrid heat pump hot water heater? It's both a heat pump hot water heater and it's also an electric hot water heater. And so how it operates is this: you can you can designate a temperature on the heat pump hot water heater. And if for some reason the basement gets below a certain temperature, let's say 40 degrees, then automatically the electric hot water heater mode goes on, and this will minimize the temperature in your basement so that there are no freeze-ups. So now I'd like to progress and put on my financier's hat. And since I have a strong background in finance, this has worked out very well for a lot of our clients, and that's through, basically, it's through what we refer to as creative financing. We all shudder the fact that if we have an old boiler and every year it's cleaned and the boiler man comes up to you and he says, you know, this could be it. This could be the end. And so what do? Well, don't cry, because that's not going to help. But what you can do is, let's talk about some creative financing. First of all, go to your state agency. I know, like Efficiency Maine, it depends on the size of your boiler. You're probably looking at a $15,000 outlay. And I'm sure that probably a lot of you just can't dip into your funds and pull up $15,000. So at the same time, with all due respect, I don't know if you've got sufficient funds to even set up a replacement reserve in the event something like that happens. So basically, what is it that you do? So the first thing is, I say, let's look for some free money. And that free money certainly would be from Efficiency Maine. And typically, as I say, depends on the size of the boiler, but you know, $900 here, sometimes $1,500, depends again on the size of the boiler. So that's basically a step. Now, let's talk about how are we going to pay for the rest of it? So what you need to look at is, you may not agree with me, but this could be the best thing that ever happened to you, because what you're doing is you are now getting rid of an energy pig, and that's what we call them, energy pigs. They just eat up that oil. What an appetite they have. So you now have the opportunity of getting an efficient, energy efficient boiler. If you're fortunate enough to be on a natural gas pipeline, that's what I would recommend. And these boilers are now 95% energy efficient. The boiler that you just took out, if you're lucky, is probably about 60% energy efficient. So this is what you do is, well, you know, maybe this wasn't a curse and maybe it's more of a blessing. So what you would do, or this is what we do, is we say, okay, let's look at how much oil you consumed last year. And now we're looking at the point that we got a 95% energy efficient boiler. How much savings is there going to be in that? And so we take that savings and then we say, well, if we had to finance this, what is the monthly payment going to be? So if we can work out a deal, and this is where creative financing comes in, is we can say, okay, you know, you're going to save X number of dollars every year and divide that by 12, and hopefully you'll come up with maybe, let's say, $100 in savings a year, probably much more than that. But you then go to the bank and you say to them, look, we've got an issue here, and we'd like to borrow some money. So I'm not sure how many of you are into banking, but based on my career on Wall Street, there's something that's called the Community Reinvestment Act. And basically what the community, the CRA we call it, what the Community Reinvestment Act is every financial institution has an obligation to invest in its community. And one of the first questions that a bank inspector asks a bank when they come in is, we want to see your CRA file. So you go into the bank and first of all, you know, tell them, hey, you know, we've really had we've got some issues here. We got we lost a boiler. We need to replace it. There's no question about it. How can you help us? Would you consider at least making a donation for a portion of it? That's the first question right out of my mouth. And, you know, typically banks have money. And as I say, you can say, you know, this is going to look really good in your CRA file. And they'll probably fall off their chair when you bring that up to them. But it is what it is. And you have to have a certain amount of gall to go in and confront these people. So the other thing that we try to do is we try to structure a financing plan where your monthly payment is equal to the anticipated monthly savings that you have. Sometimes you can do this. It all depends on the amount of money that it's going to cost to install. So by the use of Efficiency Maine, by the use of maybe twisting some local banker's arm to perhaps donate a portion of the money to reduce the loan, by the use of CRA financing, you can kind of, I feel, create a financing package that you can live with. And you will be astounded by, the savings and the comfort that you will have. And keep in mind that if you're going to do a new system, try to separate the hot water function from the boiler, so that now what's going to happen that you could not do before was you don't have to run that boiler 12 months a year. You can shut down that boiler hopefully in April, and then you crank it up again maybe in October. So look at those months that you're not using any fuel whatsoever. And that's going to help add to your savings and the ability to make your monthly payments on your loan. So it's not as bad as it looks. Sometimes it's a blessing if that old boiler goes. So keep that in mind. And again, I offer you at any time to call me, happy to walk you through what we might call creative financing. Now, one other thing that a number of other things I do want to talk to you about for a moment. One of the things that's really critical and that we look for when you look at old buildings is what's known as knob and tube wiring. Make sure you do not have any knob and tube wiring, because your insurance policy is going to have an exclusion for knob and tube wiring. And if for some reason you have a fire and the cause of that fire is knob and tube wiring, it's a very, very sad story. So all these old buildings have knob and tube wiring or had knob and tube wiring. And if you haven't considered that, please call your electrician to come over and take a look at that. So I would like to share one more idea with you. And this again is what I refer to as creative financing. it's a hobby of mine to try to find a way to get 100% financing. And not only get 100% financing, but the other point is to be able to afford 100% financing. So I want to share with you, it's just a very small segment of what I'm talking about today. And I want to be able to give you time to ask questions. So write this down. It's called 179 depreciation. Please, I don't expect you to understand it. This is not an insult to anybody's intelligence, but it's a very, very creative way of being able to reduce your cost for any improvements. Let's take that boiler that you have to replace and you call, we have, if you're in the state of Maine, we have some very, very large companies like Dead River Company, big conglomerate that's got timberlands and you name it, they got it. And the other thing they have, by the way, is a large tax bill. So what we're going to say to Dead River is this, and you can call me, I'll do it for you because I love to do this. So you say to Dead River, you get hold of their chief financial officer. I love those, delivery guys, but they can't even spell 179 depreciation, okay? So we want to talk to the CFO. And what we want to do is this. We're going to tell that CFO that we're having you people put a new boiler into our building. And it's going to cost X number of dollars. And we're going to be entitled to some 179 depreciation. Let me just kind of tell you a little bit. Basically, depreciation is basically, it's a deduction you can take on your tax return for the wearing out of an asset. So let's assume that you've got this boiler, and under this 179 depreciation, you are entitled to a tax deduction of anywhere from 40 to 60 cents a square foot in your building. Now, if you've got a fairly good sized building, you got a 10,000 square foot building, and you get a 60 cents a square foot deduction, that's a $6,000 tax credit that you can get off your taxes. I don't know of any museum that would earn that type of money to even take advantage of it. But what you do have is this. You have that tax credit, and you are entitled to assign that tax credit to any contractor that does improvements in your building. So you now go to Dead River Company and you say to them, hey, how about you and I working a deal? I got the $6,000 tax deduction. Hey, we don't need it, but look, we can assign it to you. So you take it. And obviously, it's going to it would depend on what their tax rate is. I don't want to get into all these details. All I want to convey to you is here's an opportunity where you can reduce the cost of your boiler, legitimately, legal. So with that, I hope I have been able to convey some, out-of-the-box ideas that you might not have thought of before. We've worked them. We love to. We love to hammer rich people. We love to hammer bankers for you guys. So just remember, we're fighters. We don't have to be gentlemen. So call us. We'll do the dirty work for you, okay? So if any of you have any questions from Cynthia or myself, I'll certainly be able to try to answer them.
And I should have said this at the beginning when I was speaking and introducing Daryl, but if you have a question and you haven't done so already, you can type it in the chat box that's on the Whova app. There's two that have come in already and they're related, which are great questions. So I'll read them both at the same time. The first is from Liz Holbrook. She's wondering if there is a movement to help counteract climate change by segregating storage areas, meaning putting where some materials don't require condition standards, like stone, glass for ceramics, you can put them in a spot that doesn't necessarily need the temperature or pH maintained or anything. And then let's see, Laurie also mentioned that she's wondering if the bigger issue is knowing what you have in your collection and then what will be affected by those different conditions. And Daryl, if you don't mind, I'll try to answer this one.
Please.
Yeah.
I haven't a clue. Okay.
So that's a really good question. And this is one that we've been working on at the museum just this past 2 years. As I mentioned before, we have a collection of 5 buildings. 4 of them are climate controlled, using both kind of a mixture of oil heat and then heat pumps, which have been a wonderful gift to the museum. So if anybody is just working on oil, I really encourage you to look at heat pumps to supplement that, because it cuts your oil bill in by quite a lot. Anyway, so to get back to the question, it certainly is important. And not only Liz spoke to the importance of it through climate change, which is wonderful. So if you're trying to categorize your collection by what needs to be in climate control and what can take up space perhaps in an empty barn that is not climate controlled, and that's what we're doing right now, that's a really great project to have. Of course, it's a big one because that requires your collection staff or whoever it is that's going through your collection to both know the materials and what conditions affect each thing. So it's a big project, but you should undertake that if you haven't done already, because number one, as I said, it does help reduce our effects on climate change, as well as it just helps you know where to reinvest your funding that you do have. So putting everything in perhaps one building or one room and climatizing that room instead of doing the entire campus, if you don't have the funds to do it all at once, certainly a step-by-step approach is a good one to have. So again, if you have questions, feel free to type them in, but I have a couple of questions for Daryl that'll hopefully be helpful to those of us in historic buildings. For exterior painting, how long does paint typically last on a building, and when do you put that sort of thing on a schedule?
Well, that's a great question, Cynthia. The longevity of the paint is going to be based on the application. So you want to make sure you have some credible people that are sympathetic with your building and making sure that they do the appropriate removal of whatever paint you might have on. Typically, you can look to 5 to 10 years, and that is based a lot on exposure. If you're on the salt water, that's going to have an issue. Obviously, sometimes Western exposure with the sun will certainly affect that paint as well. As far as a schedule for painting, I think if you can keep a keen eye on any painting, if you start seeing paint peel, maybe you try to address that by having somebody go up, scrape it off, and repaint it. So you're not faced with an entire side of a building or the entire building. And in our climate, it's tough. We have a variety of temperatures, and that's going to affect the longevity of the paint as well. But the thing to keep in mind is make sure you use a good quality paint. Make sure that you are using someone that is knowledgeable about painting an old building as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Sure.
I also wanted to raise the problem that I mentioned in my introduction about the raw sewage, which hopefully nobody has to deal with. But it's always good to know about how those systems work. And what the problem that I came upon, of course, not knowing anything about it, but prior to that, was if you are a museum that's connected to a sewer line, who is responsible for fixing what?
Well, most municipalities, Cynthia, it becomes somewhat of a, when I say a legal issue, it's all about title. So basically, municipalities are responsible for the repair of a sewer line to your property line, and you are responsible for the maintenance of the sewer line from your property line to your building.
Perfect, thank you. And
Sure.
so as I did learn, if anybody's having this problem as well, there's a simple kind of detergent called Root Killer. The problem that we were having is because our pipes were so old and they're made of clay, because our buildings were built in the 1820s. There's a simple thing that you can just pour down your toilet twice a year to kill all the roots, and you won't have the overflow problem anymore. So I hope that helps somebody.
That's great.
There's a couple of questions that just came up. One question was, would you consider life cycle planning for maintenance issues such as painting, roof replacement, furnace or HVAC replacement, and driveway replacement?
Yes, definitely. And the point is you may luck out and find that, let's say a roof is supposedly good for 20 years and it could last for 30 years. We just encountered, which is unbelievable, the repaving of a parking lot that was installed in 1975. And it lasted all these years, and then it finally deteriorated. So, but you know, life cycles are great. I think it's a great benchmark, and it gives you the opportunity, hopefully, that maybe you can, in your budget, be able to allocate, you know, if it's a 20-year life cycle, 1/20th of the cost of it every year, so that you have the funds when they are needed.
Thank you. Yeah. So two more questions. Do you have recommendations for installing external storm windows that are typically, or excuse me, that are historically appropriate?
Well, I haven't seen an outside storm window in a long time. Let me give you a hint. When I say a hint, which works. In Portland, there are two sources that I would recommend. One would be maybe a local historic society, and the other one would be, in Portland, they have what's called Portland Preservation. And they have a list of artisans, which I would call them, that, you know, can take care of a rock foundation, can repair old woodwork, that probably there'd be a recommendation for someone to install exterior windows. I can remember, and I'm certainly dating myself now, but I can remember as a kid, everybody had exterior storm windows, and my father would always hire the local firemen. This is a great source of income for local firemen because they can get on the ladder and bring the storm windows up to the second floor. And so historically, a fireman off duty would put up and take down your exterior storm windows and wash them for you as well. Okay.
So we have, it looks like 2 more questions have come in, and I think we only have a couple minutes left. One is relevant to what you were just speaking about experience with interior storm windows and about funding opportunities for those type of things. And I just want to echo something that Daryl said before, which is this window dressers. I know that they're just in Maine, but I'm pretty sure that there's other programs like that throughout our region. And if anyone can see my screen and you can see my window that's behind me, we have those window dressers inserts inside our historic buildings, and they easily pop in and out, by the season, and they've certainly helped our heating and cooling costs, and they're really easy to do. And it's actually a volunteer opportunity, so it's very little cost that you pay, and then you're able to recruit volunteers from your own organization to actually build them, which is a really nice kind of trade-off. So we'll also put all of these questions on the website as well. So if we have any more answers, we can put them on there. But Daryl, I'm going to put the last question to you. Can you comment on maintaining plant materials around a foundation, and if possible, tree and tree root maintenance?
I wish my wife was here. She could answer it better than I could. But as far as plant materials, the basic thing you really need to be concerned about are 2 things. One is, roots and how they might impact your foundation, particularly if you have a rock foundation. The other thing you need to really make sure that the plants, and I'm not sure if you're talking about trees as well, but make sure they're not too close to the building. Because if all of a sudden the limbs grow and they start touching the building, again, what's going to happen is you're creating some shade, and that's going to create moisture, and you're going to see your paint deteriorate. So make sure there's a clearance between your trees and your buildings and your plants as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, I want to thank everybody. I can't see if I think that we got everybody. And if we didn't, like I said, please, the website that we've set up is the smallmuseumtoolbox.wordpress.com currently. And then you're perfectly welcome to visit that and also submit your own answers if you've found anything that'll help all of us in the field. And then obviously find answers to questions that you might still have. So I want to thank Daryl and of course Rainey for helping us out on this session. And then thanks for joining us today.
It's been fun. Thank you.